Concerns in ceasefire talks in Ukraine are driving frustrations with the Trump administration to new levels. Are transatlantic relations on thin ice? Let's ask DW's Stephen Beardsley joining us from Berlin. Well, hi, Stephen. The Trump administration has really had much good to say about Europe. Is the latest U.S. national security strategy document any surprise?
Yeah, in many ways not, because we know that Europe has disagreed with the Trump administration over many things this past 12 months. If we look at trade, if we look at issues of military spending, the two have been at loggerheads. That in itself is not surprising. What's shocking about what we've seen over the past weeks from the perspective of Europeans is that it unveils this kind of rift in the worldview between the two sides that sometimes surfaces, but more recently had been covered up. And what that means is that when you see in word that Washington is coming out and representing more populist ideas with, for example, the strategy review, borrowing populist phrasing, Kremlin phrasing, talking about civilization, erasure, talking about basically the whiteness of Europe being the measure by which it is successful. And then when you see the interview with Donald Trump yesterday, in which he repeated some of this, talked about Europe as decaying, and then in action, when you see with those ceasefire talks in Ukraine that Europe has essentially been left at the table alone from Washington, feels itself left out, then you can see what some of the frustrations are about here. Now, so far, the European response has been mostly measured on the official level. We see top EU diplomat Kaja Kallas saying, look, this is still a strong alliance. We saw the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying, look, some of this is understandable frustrations from the side of Washington, but we also know there's a lot of discontent that's not made public. And we see, for example, Kaja's predecessor, Josep Borrell, he was the former top diplomat for the EU, posting on Twitter on Tuesday, look, it's time to recognize that Trump is essentially an adversary to Europe.
All right. So, Stephen, are we seeing a slow motion rupture in the transatlantic relationship as we know it, and is Europe prepared for it?
Yeah, I think one of the things is when you look at the rest of that strategy review document and you sort of understand it as a whole, you realize that Washington really does want transactional relationships with former allies. It's less interested in values-based or ideas-based alliances that maybe former American administrations found with Europe. And Europe itself, many leaders would admit, have admitted that strategically Europe has not lived up to its expectations when it comes to things like military spending. And so Europe does have itself to blame in some of these circumstances. On the other hand, we know that if Trump is more transactional in his view of alliances, we know that within his administration, there are louder voices that are more ideological, especially when you look at J.D. Vance, when you look at Elon Musk. And these are the voices that seem to be coming through in this document in regards to Europe. And for Europe, that's a bit frightening when you look at this administration, the next 3 years, and then subsequent administrations. Is, in the best case scenario, Europe going to be somewhat neglected from the U.S., or will the U.S. indeed be something of an adversary to the political mainstream?
Yes, certainly. And it does look like Europe has a lot of preparation to do to be ready for the kind of worldview Trump is projecting, provided it stays beyond his term. Thanks a lot for joining us for the moment, Stephen. Now, South Korea and Japan reacted furiously on Wednesday after Chinese and Russian military aircraft conducted joint patrols around the two nations, with both Seoul and Tokyo